In the gaming industry, there are often two kinds of groups focusing on creating the products we interact with. The creative video game developers who do all the hard work building the unique digital worlds we experience, and the corporate executives who fund and edit the final product, with an overall goal of appeasing shareholders and making a huge return on their investments. The following titles were sent out to die, only to achieve near universal acclaim from players, shocking developers and executives alike with insane profits and positive reception. I'm Scott from WhatCulture.com, and these are 9 assumed to fail video games that destroyed expectations. Number 9. Fortnite. Believe it or not, there was a time few people knew what Fortnite even was. The game was basically Epic Games' attempt at making a Left 4 Dead clone with the goal of convincing people that they should start looking outside of Steam for places to buy games digitally. People received Fortnite pretty lukewarm. The story was fundamental, the gameplay was lackluster, and many people actually hated the art style, complaining that the game was clearly marketed towards children who weren't even old enough to play due to the game's initial T rating. In fact, the only thing people kinda liked about Fortnite was its unique building mechanics, creating custom forts to hold off the undead mutant hordes. In a latch-dist attempt to draw in players, Fortnite decided to take from then famous PUBG and apply its battle royale system as a separate game mode. Almost overnight, and in a way far more effectively than what PUBG, H1Z1 or any other battle royale had done, this propelled Fortnite from a relatively unknown game into one of the most popular and lucrative titles ever made. Drawing in players of all ages and professional battle royale gamers, it practically funded the Epic Games Store, evolving into a worldwide phenomenon. Number 8. Doom 2016. For Doom's 4th main installment, expectations were beyond high, and id Software wanted to make sure the product they released was perfect. Halfway through production though, id threw out all their hard work and started again from scratch. Cancelled because this version of Doom 4 felt too much like Call of Duty, you can still find footage online that only confirmed id were right to do so. Even after that though, initial playtests were pessimistic. The multiplayer was poorly received and people simply didn't like the game. Eventually though, 10 years after initial development began, Doom 2016 was perfect. For fans of the original release and the beating heart of Doom as an IP, this felt like coming home. Doom's music, the tone, the setting, and the main character were all very well received by fans and critics alike. Even people who never got the chance to play the original games could enjoy this fresh take on the classic run-and-gun genre, replete with secret throwback levels as icing on the cake. Number 7. Ghost of Tsushima. Originally following an awkward shakuhachi performance at E3 2018, which in reality was a master of the instrument busting out a technique that is unbelievably hard to replicate, many viewed Ghost of Tsushima as an Assassin's Creed clone. At that time, everyone was so burnt out from Ubisoft's open world copy and paste way of game development that few were actually excited about the game. Even the setting of feudal Japan did very little to deter people from saying this was just the Japanese Assassin's Creed game that Ubisoft didn't want to make. Thankfully, as a testament to just how phenomenal Tsushima is, all that chatter went away immediately at launch. Ghost of Tsushima had a clear love and respect for Japan, balancing tactile swordfighting with optional stealth, plus side quests that reinforced the thematics of Jin Sakai doing what he could to save the island of Tsushima on a small and large scale simultaneously. This surprise hit had its own feel, gorgeous visuals, and a story that was up there with The Last of Us 2 and God of War's reboot. Ghost of Tsushima became a game of the year for many people, including ourselves for 2020, and for good reason. Number 6. Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy. To say the latest Guardians game had an underwhelming preview cycle would be one hell of an understatement. Gameplay looked flat and repetitive, with the art direction feeling like this was glorified DLC for the already failing Avengers. Actually play the game though, and this was way more character and script driven, way more Mass Effect-y than anything in the trailers or marketing. Guardians' story is just great, its themes of friends becoming family hitting home for a lot of people, and we actually had effective use of humor in a Marvel product, with some truly emotional moments juxtaposed against self-aware quips and black comedic beats from Rocket Raccoon. Viewed away from those naff trailers, the game was gorgeous, with a huge variety of locations and some stunning lighting across the board. Sure, you could only play as Star-Lord, but that was the point. You were squarely in the shoes of a leader of a band of misfit criminals, all with their own compelling reasons to keep fighting. Checking in with your crew and getting your Mass Effect on in between missions is what brings it all together. Number 5. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. When EA got access to the Star Wars IP, they quickly remade the classic franchise Battlefront. The first was heavily flawed but successful, then Battlefront 2 showed the company's greed on full display. It tanked any hope we had that the publisher would do right by the IP, and when Jedi Fallen Order was announced, it was met with skepticism and assumptions of microtransactions being hidden in there somewhere. Thankfully, as we found out on a press trip just before launch, this was an actual video game. Not only had EA let Titanfall devs Respawn do their own thing, but they practically made Star Wars Dark Souls, emerging as the finest Star Wars game in quite some time. There was lightsaber customization, a lovable crew of ragtag rebels, plenty of fan service, and even some surprising twists. Playing things humble and only really kicking into gear at the final level, this is how you reintroduce people to a series of franchise elements they already love without being exploitative. Number 4, Dying Light. The run-up to 2011's Dead Island was something else. With one hell of an effective announcement trailer, hype was through the roof for what should have been a unique take on the zombie genre. While it's safe to say Dead Island has its fans, the vast majority, especially following buggy DLC Riptide, were monumentally let down, swearing off Techland for good. With the assumption being that Dead Island 2 is where it would all come together, instead Techland left the IP entirely, swerving into trying again with another new IP that appeared to be Dead Island meets Mirror's Edge. Even as the game was shown off, the general reception was shrugged shoulders, as gamers were simply burnt out either by effective zombie titles or the assumptions that came with new ones. Nonetheless, Dying Light was released in 2015 and became a word-of-mouth cult classic. Some innovative first-person parkour felt immediately engaging, weapons were very fun to use, and zombies themselves would change across a day-night cycle, dynamically affecting missions and scenarios as the story unfolded. Dying Light may not have revitalized the zombie genre overall, but it was such an entertaining game to play by yourself or with friends, earning a slow crawl to the top of the game charts as we each gave it a chance. Number 3, Five Nights at Freddy's. Indie video games are perhaps the largest mixed bag of content you can find on digital storefronts. Sometimes they're unique, award-winning must-plays that dominate a given year's discourse, and sometimes they're just copy-paste shovelware like the recent spate of jumping games on the PlayStation Store. Thankfully, the majority of indie titles you hear about now are worth checking out, with awesome gameplay ideas or stories to tell, but that wasn't really the case back in 2014. The developer of Five Nights at Freddy's, Scott Cawthon, was barely known, and many of his earlier projects were downright terrible. When Cawthon launched a Kickstarter for his indie Chuck E. Cheese looking horror game, he asked for $100,000 and earned exactly zero. Thankfully, Scott decided to go ahead and develop Five Nights at Freddy's by himself, with the rest being history. It turns out the simplicity of the game combined with a laser focus on jump scares garnered worldwide appeal. With the thanks of YouTube and the rise of streamers as a viable career path, Five Nights at Freddy's became a gaming phenomenon, spawning multiple sequels and spin-offs and creating a universe of sheer terror that everyone can enjoy. Number 2, Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor. It really needs to be reiterated just how much headspace Assassin's Creed took up across the early 2010s. Thanks to annual releases and the popularity of Ubisoft's open-world design at the time, it was easy to look at something like Shadow of Mordor and assume Warner Brothers were cashing in. A former Ubisoft dev even outright accused WB of stealing code from Assassin's Creed 2. At the time, the Nemesis system meant nothing, a proposed gameplay mechanic where enemies would form rivalries with the player. Most thought that just sounded stupid and likely a surface-level feature being leaned on for marketing. Surprisingly though, Shadow of Mordor dropped to near-perfect reviews. The Nemesis system was a standout next-gen idea that boggled the mind as to how many factors it was tracking. Combat was supremely fun, rewarding, and fluid. WB would copyright the Nemesis system, killing off an entire genre of innovation in the process, as they've only iterated on it once in almost 10 years, but at least Shadow of Mordor was an easy reason to invest in new hardware. Talion and Celebrimbor's story was very satisfying, the Nemesis system created infinite stories from simple goons to epic warlords, and many felt Shadow of Mordor was part of Tolkien's work, even though it was a completely original tale. And number 1, Pokemon Red and Green. You can likely walk up to any stranger on the street and ask them what does Nintendo make, and they'll respond with Mario or Pokemon first. With that in mind, it comes as a major shock to learn that the original Pokemon games, Red and Green at the time, were expected to be massive failures. Nintendo was initially confused when Pokemon creator Satoshi Tajiri pitched them a game called Capsule Monsters, where players would acquire and trade creatures using the original Game Boy's link cable. Development of Red and Green was extremely touch and go, and without legendary developer Shigeru Miyamoto, Pokemon would would never have existed. Over time, Miyamoto helped develop the game, and was also the one who pitched Tajiri the idea that there should be a pair of titles to build interest. This only made things more complicated though, and by the time Pokemon was near release, many at developer Game Freak had quit because they just weren't getting paid, including Tajiri himself. Pokemon Red and Green were barely marketed by Nintendo, even at launch, leading to the game's real marketing coming from players telling their friends to get the F on these titles on a console people just weren't interested in. The two games' rising popularity led to the release of a third title sold as an exclusive magazine subscription reward called Pokemon Blue, with updated graphics and bug fixes. The rest, especially once the Pokemon TV show landed in the West, is history. And those are our picks for 9 assumed to fail video games that destroyed expectations. Let me know your favorites down in the comments below, and please subscribe to the WhatCulture Gaming Podcast featuring myself, Jules, James Dowse, and Josh every week. For now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com, and I'll catch you soon.